Welcome to Module 1 of Clinical Research Associate Certificate. Module 1 is entitled Principles of Clinical Research Associate. At the end of this module, you will be able to define the role of a clinical research associate in the clinical research industry, to describe the responsibilities of a clinical research associate in a clinical trial, to explain the selection and qualification of a clinical research associate, and to explain the career path of a clinical research associate in the clinical research industry. CRA is an acronym widely communicated for Clinical Research Associate in the pharmaceutical, medical devices, biotechnology, contract research organizations, and cosmetic companies. There are many interchangeable words used to describe a clinical research associate. It is alternatively known as a local trial manager, trial monitor, site manager, or a site management director. Let us first understand the role of a CRA. The CRA position has been in existence in the clinical research industry since early 1980s. CRA is a professional who performs quality monitoring and oversight of Phase 1 to Phase 3 clinical trials conducted at clinical investigator sites following the sponsor requirements to ensure the clinical trial is conducted and documented properly following the protocol, good clinical practice, standard operating procedures, and the applicable regulatory requirements. The CRA is a representative working on behalf of a sponsor who acts as the main line of communication between the sponsor and the clinical investigator sites of different geographical locations, covering the full life cycle of a single or multiple clinical trials. The CRA acts as a source of information reference to the clinical investigator sites on the clinical trial requirements. As a CRA, one should not have a direct subject or patient contact at the clinical investigator site. The purpose of the CRA monitoring is to protect the rights and well-being of human subjects, to ensure reported clinical trial data are accurate, complete, and verifiable from the source documents. It is also to ensure the clinical trial conduct is in compliance with the currently approved protocol amendments, with good clinical practice, and with the applicable regulatory requirements. In the standards of good clinical practice, the CRA responsibilities encompasses such as to verify protocol compliance at investigator site by all personnel, to verify signed informed consent form is obtained before every trial subject participation, to determine all adverse events are reported timely as required by good clinical practice, the protocol, the ethics committee, the sponsor, and the applicable regulatory requirements, to communicate deviations from good clinical practice, the protocol, the standard operating procedures, and the applicable regulatory requirements to the investigator, and taking appropriate actions to prevent recurrence of detected deviations. To verify all investigator site personnel are performing protocol requirements in reference to the delegated functional role at the clinical investigator site. To verify the investigator has adequate qualification, resources, facilities, and equipments throughout the clinical trial duration, to ensure all clinical investigator site personnel are adequately informed about the clinical trial requirement, to verify all the required reports, notifications, applications, and submissions provided by the investigator are accurate, complete, and timely, to verify the investigational medicinal product is adequate in supply, shipment receipt, storage conditions, administration, return, and disposition, to verify the investigator is enrolling only eligible subjects, to provide accurate reporting of subject recruitment rate at the clinical investigator site, to verify the source documents, case report form, and other trial records are accurate, complete, and current, with appropriate correction, addition, or deletion as applicable, to ensure all trial supplies such as investigator brochure and laboratory kits needed are provided adequately, to determine essential trial documents are adequately maintained at the investigator site. We have used a couple of clinical terminologies in the earlier slides. I will first explain what the terms mean in clinical research context before we proceed with the subsequent slides for the ease of your understanding in the entire CRA certificate course. Sponsor is an individual, company, institution, or organization which takes responsibility for the initiation, management, and/or financing of a clinical trial. Contract research organization is a person or an organization contracted by the sponsor to perform one or more of a sponsor's trial-related duties and functions. It is also alternatively known as a vendor. Investigator is a person responsible for the conduct of the clinical trial at a trial site. If a trial is conducted by a team of individuals at a trial site, the investigator is the responsible leader of the team and would generally be known as the principal investigator. The supporting investigators are known as sub-investigators. Institution is any public or private entity or agency or medical or dental facility where clinical trials are conducted. It is alternatively known as clinical investigator site or trial site. Sponsor investigator is an individual who both initiates and conducts alone or with others a clinical trial and under whose immediate direction the investigational product is administered to, dispensed to, or used by a subject. The term does not include any person or other than an individual. The obligations of a sponsor investigator include both of those of a sponsor and those of an investigator. These terminologies can be referenced from ICH GCP R2 Section 2. Let's now have a knowledge check. Is this statement true or false of a CRA role? The act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported following the protocol, standard operating procedures, GCP, and the applicable regulatory requirements. The answer is true. Let's move on to the next learning objective. In the reality of the clinical research industry, the CRA is employed by pharmaceutical companies, medical research institutions, research departments, government agencies, medical device companies, and contract research organizations. These companies provide finances to support drug development and clinical research. They are also known as a sponsor in the clinical research context. The CRA role is generally positioned in the Research and Development Division, among other functional divisions within a sponsor or an organization. As we narrow into the Research and Development Division of a sponsor organization, CRA is aligned in the Clinical Operations Department. The department is led by a team of senior management, such as directors and managers. CRA is the part of the front-line delegates in the Clinical Operations Department. In a sponsor organization or a vendor organization who is contracted to perform CRA role, the responsibilities of a CRA covers a wide scope of monitoring activities in a clinical life cycle. The scope of the responsibilities varies in different companies. In the subsequent slides, the overall CRA responsibilities are presented in a general context of a broad perspective. In this slide, I shall first touch on the responsibilities generally performed at all phases of a clinical trial life cycle. A clinical trial life cycle starts with the beginning phase, ongoing phase, and closure phase of a clinical trial cycle. The CRA responsibilities commonly performed for all stages of a clinical trial are to oversee for more than one clinical trial for more than one clinical investigator sites. This is subject to subject recruitment volume, the therapeutic area involved, and clinical trial phase. To maintain collaboration among sponsor, vendors, and clinical investigator sites. To assist and advise with regulatory and ethics committee submission and continual reporting requirements. To train clinical investigator site personnel on the clinical trial requirements. To oversee the clinical trial training of clinical investigator site personnel at every investigator site. To oversee the maintenance of clinical trial investigator files with the essential documents. To communicate with external and internal groups to evaluate investigator site needs and timelines. In the beginning of a clinical trial, it involves planning, setting up, and initiating of a clinical trial at the clinical investigator site. At this phase, the CRA is required to conduct visibility for a clinical trial, to identify potential clinical investigators and clinical investigator sites nationally and internationally for a potential clinical trial, to oversee the development of study documents and trials, to identify potential vendors or centralized services of a clinical study to the internal clinical trial team, to evaluate the adequacy of clinical investigator sites at site selection visit, to coordinate attendance of the clinical investigator site personnel at the clinical investigator meeting of a clinical trial, to initiate the startup of a clinical trial at the clinical investigator sites after the receipt of the ethics committee and regulatory approval through a site initiation meeting, to ensure necessary study supplies, example, investigational medicinal products, equipments, study manuals, and study folders are available at the investigator site to identify and report any inadequacy in the setup and initiation of a clinical trial to the sponsor, to prepare, conduct, and report site selection and site initiation visit promptly. After the site selection and initiation of a clinical trial, the CRA is required to prepare, conduct, and report routine monitoring site visits at the prescribed frequency of a clinical trial, to verify informed consent was obtained from the subjects before trial participation, to verify subject recruitment progress, to verify protocol compliance and report non-compliance issues promptly to sponsor and relevant regulatory bodies, to review the accuracy, completeness, and consistencies of source documents and clinical trial documentation regularly, to ensure all clinical data are captured and corrected with queries into the clinical database as required, to review the adequacy of safety reporting and investigational medicinal product management at a clinical investigator site, to review safe handling and adequate management of biological samples, to provide remedial, corrective, and preventive actions with training as required. The closure of a clinical trial can be due to clinical trial closure or premature closure or termination of clinical investigator site. The CRA is required to reconcile all clinical supplies, such as investigational medicinal product, equipment, and trial manual before closure, to reconcile and review all clinical reported data and queries before database log, to assist with the termination of clinical study activities upon review of significant non-compliance issues, to assist with the archival of the study documents to the archival facility, to conduct and report site termination or site closure visit to the regulatory authority and the ethics committee, to reconcile all site payments at a clinical investigator site. As mentioned earlier, there are new entrant CRA, junior CRA, and experienced CRA employed in the clinical research industry. The common additional responsibilities related to a senior CRA, apart from the new entrant or junior CRA, are to provide support of internal audits, client hosting, and regulatory inspections, to support junior CRA with co-monitoring and mentoring, to conduct visibility for a clinical trial, to identify potential clinical investigators and clinical investigator sites nationally and internationally for a potential clinical trial, to oversee the development of trial documents and tools, to identify potential vendors or centralized services of a clinical trial to the internal clinical trial team, to evaluate or qualify the adequacy of clinical investigator sites at site selection visit. The working environment or condition of a CRA is traditionally physical on-site visitation at a clinical investigator site since 1980s. As the clinical investigator sites are located on different geographical locations in different countries, the CRA is required to travel most of the time in order to perform its quality review activities. The CRA occasionally works in the office and works at home most of the time. The CRA is frequently seen on the road. Due to the diverse geographical location of the clinical investigator sites, sponsor has over the years employed CRA in the respective local countries who is familiar with the local healthcare culture, business culture, and local language to better support the clinical investigator sites. It is also reduces operational costs on a sponsor with more domestic travel instead of cross-country travels. With the introduction of advanced information technology, the delivery of CRA responsibilities generally transforms to a combination of remote oversight, example, virtual review of data through computerized clinical systems and the virtual communication platform, and physical on-site visitation of the clinical investigator site over time. The CRA future responsibilities are expected to incline in technology-based monitoring. Let's have a knowledge check before we proceed to the next learning objective. Which of the following directly describes the monitoring responsibility of a CRA as required by ICH GCP E6 standards? The answer shall be provided in the next slide. I hope all of you have completed with the correct answer. The answers are highlighted in red. A, C, D, E, and F. Based on the requirements of ICH GCP, the CRA should be appointed by the sponsor, monitors should be appropriately trained, and should have the scientific and/or clinical knowledge needed to monitor the trial adequately. A monitor's qualification should be documented. In the reality world of the clinical research industry, the sponsor recruits the CRA based on the individual education, qualification, clinical research related or clinical monitoring experience, professional skills and abilities, clinical research knowledge, and professional certification. As a CRA, the CRA should possess bachelor's degree in sciences. The CRA should have clinical research knowledge in the pharmaceutical industry, terminology and practices, relevant ethics and regulation knowledge, industry standards, clinical trial execution knowledge, infrastructure and operational characteristics of contract research organization, vendor and sponsor, knowledge of the structure of medical records, database concepts and formats, pharmacovigilance, data management and statistics. Some CRA may have completed clinical research certifications such as Certified Clinical Research Associate. In experience, the CRA may have no experience with no prior internship exposure. Some CRAs may have minimum of 2 to 5 years of directly supporting clinical trials or similar areas such as your clinical trial administrator or your clinical research associate. In terms of skills and abilities, the CRA will require advanced monitoring, writing, professional presentation, communication, organization, and leadership skills, with computer literacy, language proficiency, and sometimes CRAs may have driving license to support their on-site monitoring visits for different clinical investigator sites locations. In a sponsor organization or a contract research organization, there will be a CRA job description. The job description will provide the recruitment requirements of a CRA and the roles and responsibility of a CRA expected by every organization. Generally, the company uses a company standard template which specifies the level of the CRA, junior, senior, or new entrant, describing the minimum requirement when in terms of education, experience, knowledge, skills, abilities, and even certifications requirements. The CRA job description is generally reviewed every 2 or 3 years, and this document is developed and approved by the Clinical Operations Management and Human Resource Division. The qualification and experience of the CRA are documented in a curriculum vitae upon employment by the sponsor or the contract research organization. The curriculum vitae is a company standard template used in every organization, which includes the minimum content of education, prior and current experience, skills, or abilities, certification, or even current office and locations. The curriculum vitae is required to be updated by every employee either annually or every 2 years, subjected to the organization requirement. The curriculum vitae content is generally reviewed by the line manager of the employee, and it will be signed and dated by the respective employee itself. Upon employment as a CRA, the CRA is provided with CRA knowledge and on-the-job or field training. The CRA knowledge includes good clinical practice, local regulations and legislation, company procedures and policies, computerized systems related to clinical monitoring. Knowledge training can be delivered either as a classroom training or online training. On-the-job field training includes co-monitoring field or on-site training for pre-trial, site initiation, site monitoring, and site closure visits. The field training competency assessments are performed for all types of clinical monitoring site visits before the CRA performs its first independent site visit. The CRA on-site performance is continually reviewed annually or every 2 years, subjected to the organization requirement. Based on the job description of the CRA role, what is the attributes required of a CRA? Think about that. In general, the CRA is an individual who is a communicator, a leader, meticulous, self-starter, relational, independent, problem solver, technology savvy, versatile, observer, and investigative. A conclusive word to describe a CRA is a professional who is a jack of all trades with flexibility and adaptability, with strong people skills and a lifelong learning attitude, a balance of an introvert and an extrovert personality. You may be interested to do a personality test, and you may try the Myers-Briggs personality. It's a personality test to identify the areas of your gifting and areas of improvement. The outcome of the assessment will provide you with a personalized analysis of the 8 aspects: extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, and perceiving. The personality test may help you to utilize the assessment outcome to enhance your giftings, and identify areas of improvement to build your career pathway and to enhance your daily work performance. If you find that you don't have the qualities related to a CRA, you are still able to develop the qualities over time with the on-the-job experience or engaged training courses. It is not a no-fit answer for every potential CRA candidate. Let's have a knowledge check before we proceed to the next learning objective. Which of the following are false statements of CRA selection and qualification? The answer shall be provided in the next slide. I hope all of you have selected the correct answer. The answer is A, C, and D. We have provided much on the ideal CRA portrait or image in the earlier part of this module. We shall now explain the career opportunities for a CRA in the clinical research industry. CRA is the fundamental or the stepping stone to accelerate your career pathway in the clinical research industry. You begin at an associate level within the clinical operations department of a sponsor or a contract research organization. There are various options to accelerate your career progression in the industry. You may progress in a lateral or a vertical approach. If you progress vertically within the clinical operations, you will rise up and progress as a senior CRA, moving on as a clinical operations lead, associate clinical operations manager, clinical operations manager, clinical operations director. For some, they may want to progress in a horizontal direction. For example, after being a few years of a CRA, they may want to move on to be in project management, regulatory affairs, data management, or medical writing. As a CRA, you will face career challenges in your daily operations, such as conflict result from miscommunication with clinical investigator sites, difficulties in report writing, or not sure of how to apply the GCP standards. In other scenarios, you are an existing professional who is concerned whether do I know enough or I am still not sure of what I'm doing is right. You could also be a new entrant to a clinical research industry, such as a CRA. You may wonder, what do I need to know? There are some recommendations that you may consider to gain further awareness and deepen your knowledge in the profession and in the clinical research industry. Regardless of your experience and knowledge level, it can be done on a continual basis to add value to your professional career journey. You may engage in professional certifications, which is not mandatory, but for added value knowledge, you may attend technical courses related to clinical research, for example, advanced diploma as a clinical research operations or in pharmacovigilance, or you may want to apply for a master's course in applied clinical trial management. You may also want to attend soft skill courses in leadership, in SOP writing, in report writing. You may also want to be updated in the industry information through industry association and membership, such as the Association of Clinical Research Professionals. You may want to receive continual updates through reading of industry websites or magazines such as CenterWatch. You are the driver of your own professional career journey. continually sow to your adult learning journey to reap a harvest in your career. To summarize, different skills, abilities, and insights will be needed if you want to add value to your professional growth in the clinical research industry and moving towards management and leadership position in the relevant specific area of specialty within the clinical research industry. To complete Module 1, CRA Principles, you are required to complete a quiz. The first question: what is the industry standard used in clinical trial management describing the responsibilities of clinical monitoring by the CRA? Please provide the name of the industry standard. The answer is ICH GCP E6R2. Which of the following ICH GCP E6R2 section describes the monitoring activities performed by a CRA? The answer shall be provided in the next slide. The answer is ICH GCP E6R2 section 5.18.4. Which of the following ICH GCP E6R2 section describes the selection and qualification of a CRA? The answer shall be provided in the next slide. I hope you have selected the correct answer. It is D, ICH GCP E6R2 section 5.18.2. We have completed Module 1. To summarize, CRA is an essential and pivotal multitasking clinical operations role to provide first-line quality monitoring of a clinical trial at the clinical investigator site on behalf of the sponsor. The CRA scope of work requires a strong breadth and depth of knowledge, skills, and experience in clinical drug development and clinical trial management without close supervision. To overcome the demands of the job scope and to progress in the career journey, continual learning is essential for every CRA to add value to its clinical monitoring. Identify your area of gifts and talents, partner with them and your instincts to let all of them work for you in the crafting of your career pathway in the clinical research industry. Prior to COVID, with the occurrence of COVID, the technology is intensively introduced into the industry and the global economy. It will be part of every aspect of our lives and professional work. The catchword is virtual. Thus, it is important for every CRA to include virtual-related training in its career planning pathway. The module content is supported by the following references. Thank you.